This is the Raising Rebellion podcast, episode number 10.
Welcome to the Raising Rebellion Parenting Podcast, where we will explore how to help kids seek purpose and passion, challenge society's expectations, and avoid a standardized life. Now here's your host, Paul H.K.
Hi, everyone, and thank you so much for being here. Very excited about today's show. We have a first for this podcast. Today, we have our first father-daughter interview with Amar and Drishti Narang. Amar considers himself to be a rebel not by choice, but by necessity. He was raised in India and was strongly influenced by his parents before losing both of them at the age of 16, where he was then left to take care of his younger brother. His extended family preached business as opposed to education, but Amar didn't agree with them and instead pursued education as his parents had impressed upon him. His oldest daughter, Drishti, is a recent college grad, where she hesitantly decided to take a gap year at the suggestion of her dad, even as her peers chose the more traditional route of going directly to college. And together they talk about his life experiences that provides him with his thoughtful perspective, her appreciation for her dad's parenting style, and about their partnership as they move through life together. And in fact, what's fun about a lot of this episode is that it isn't really an interview. It's kind of more that we get to eavesdrop on a father and daughter's relationship and how they have made it work well for them. I hope you like today's episode as much as I do. It's really fun. So here is my interview with Amar and Drishti. Okay, today we have a first. We have the first dad and daughter interview on Raising Rebellion. Welcome to our first team interviewees, Amar and Drishti Narang. Welcome to both of you.
Thanks, Paul.
Thanks for being here. Let's dive right in. Amar, I'd like to begin with you, if I could. If we could start at the beginning. I always like to start at the very beginning. Can you talk a little bit about your life growing up and your basically a high-level summary of your journey to where you are today?
Absolutely. First of all, thanks for the opportunity to talk about myself and my parenting. Started my life in a very small town in India. Brought up in a traditional, very conservative environment in a city called Jaipur, India, back in 1972. Spent the first 25 years there, and then the next, 20 years primarily in U.S. With some travel. Drishti, my daughter, my firstborn, I think she came into my life in 97. That was a couple of months before I left for India for my doctoral program in Florida. And I think since she has been born, I think we've been traveling a lot. So she is the culprit. Out that nice, cozy place.
Neither you or Mom had left the country until I was born.
Yes, I didn't travel much. Well, we did travel locally, I guess. Yes. So I had an abnormal, I would say, childhood, in the sense that lost my parents at a very young age, around 16. That was a major impression on me. But I was also lucky to be raised by two wonderful parents. And that left a very strong influence on me. Would love to talk a little bit about that at some point. But most of my life, I've been career-wise and, all over the place between business and academia, and now, back into startups. Mm-hmm. So I've been kind of a rebel, I would say, but not by choice, more by necessity. Mm. And I've been told that a lot. I do scare a lot of people, not because I try, because I'm tall and can be overwhelming once in a while. But yes, it's been a nice journey. But I think my life did take a very, very strong turn when I became a parent. And I have the most wonderful experience which is still going on being a parent. And I do take that role seriously. So I think that's the kind of short of it.
Okay, that's fantastic. Now, can you tell me a little bit more? You mentioned how you were a rebel, not by choice, but by necessity. Can you tell me a little bit more about what you mean by that?
So I think, so two thoughts. One, I think most of your audience will appreciate is that I think if you step outside of US or the Western world, life is not very easy. You have to earn every step of it, earn every privilege of it. I think the third world countries like India or even any other Asian countries, I think people relate to that. And I think kids born here, or not just here, kids born over the last decade or two do not have a very strong concept of scarcity or natural vagaries like war and major outbreaks and risks out there in life. They're relatively raised in a bubble.
Sure.
I think, and then the third world country brings a little different sense around. You have to earn every bit of whatever you want. Much more competitive environment, much more fight for your life. So that's one aspect, and the other is, I think, a generational gap. So I think for me, there's always this tension between parent-child because of at least 20-25 years of age gap. And that kind of puts them into at least two different generations. And the expectation, the whole culture, the experience is different. I had to then, because I lost my parent at a younger age, I was then raised by my grandparents, who were from another generation past. And so it was a two-generation gap.
All at the same time, you were raising your younger brother.
Yes. But I think I'm trying to raise a point of the rebel, which is I think I wasn't a rebel for most part when I was with my parents. I think we were much more in a very secure environment where you do what your father tells you to do. That you don't really challenge them, you don't question them, you don't even make eye contact with them. That's the kind of environment I'm talking about. But my mom, on the other hand, was a very educated, from a very large, very, very, very sophisticated family, kind of married into a very small town joint family. But she always was the source of, and very, very broad-minded kind of philosophy, and she kind of inculcated that with us and allowed that space, secure space within the house. So that's what my first 15 years were, and there was not too much need to or necessity to rebel. There were a few moments when I had to stand up and fight for what I wanted, but bulk of the rebel came out after my parents died, and I had to fight every bit to take control, do at least some things which I wanted in my life, as well as protect my brother, who was like 4 years younger to me, and make sure that both of us have at least some sense of continuity on what we wanted in our life and control over that. And that I have to fight every bit of it, because most of the guardians or the decision makers to be were in the mindset that education is not worthwhile, business is the way to go. And most of them had not crossed second and third grade in education of schooling, and they didn't appreciate education. They didn't appreciate the new way of doing things, and they were forcing me to kind of become or take over and be part of a family business without really letting me have at least some sense of
over your life,
of awareness and education and control over my life. That's where the rebel had to come out. It was more of a survival instinct than anything else.
Right. I mean, that's quite a situation to be put in as a 15-year-old, 16-year-old, to all of a sudden become, really a parent to your younger brother, even though you did have your grandparents there. Do you think that you're at the point of where you were still a teenager, right?
Yes.
And teenagers just naturally rebel, right? Because that's the point in life where you're kind of seeking your own identity, and you kind of don't want to be told what to do. You sort of want to find it yourself, right? Do you think that, almost looking back in hindsight, that the culture being what it was, you mentioned that the focus was really about business and there's no need for education. Do you think that almost pushed you to the other side because that was sort of the prevailing mindset, and you're saying, your instinct was to kind of push back and say, no, I want to go get that education? Do you think that might have been the case?
So yes and no. I think yes to a degree, that there was a teenager in me, but no to the as a core or primary reason too. I think the primary reason was I never bought that philosophy of just basically being part of a family business and just, cruising along as a group. Because I think it wasn't the business education. It was more not believing in the set of values they were representing, the group represented.
And it was also sort of a concept that, like, when you give up and let that, overcome you and let them make the decisions for you, then you sort of have set that precedent, and they then get to make decisions for you because, he's older, because he has a position of power for quite a while, forever. There's some people that never start making their own decisions. Like I
think in my particular case, for me, let me address Paul's question, and then I'll definitely address that part you're raising. So coming back, I think the values represented by that group in front of me and what lifestyle they had didn't attract me. And they wanted me to be part of that. So for me, it wasn't, challenging them or not liking them or, just doing everything opposite, which I've been told to do. So it wasn't that. But for me, it was, I needed to find my own way because I didn't like the way which was available or in front of me.
Yeah.
So I had to find an alternative because what it was in front of me wasn't acceptable.
Yeah.
And the only way I knew I could find a way was to become educated, liberal, become aware of what other options are out there, which was only possible through education.
Sometimes I wonder if you skipped being a teenager completely because of this elaborate thought process. Like, who has that at 16, Dad?
Yeah.
You really did skip being a teenager.
Well, circumstance, it sounds like circumstance had a lot to do with that, though. Right?
That's exactly right. So for me, I did not really had too much of a choice. I was thrown into a circumstance, and I just basically, my survival instinct took over, and my basic core was tested. In the sense, for me, basically allowing myself to just keep my head above water and, providing a secure space for my brother were the only two priorities I had. And every decision I made was towards that.
Right. Now, do you think that you're not believing in that concept of just going straight into business and, without having the formal education? Where do you think that value came from? Do you think that came from your parents, maybe your mom?
So you're right. So that I can easily answer. So absolutely, the primary source of that motivation and value was my mom. And actually, I will give a chunk of credit to my father too. And the way it goes is the following. My mom had a very strong educational background. She was a teacher. She had B.Ed. She did teach for a while. She came from a very large, sophisticated, educated family, in Burma and then in Delhi. So that was one. But onto my dad, even as much as conservative environment he was brought up in, he was the most educated in his family. He almost finished high school. And he supported my mom throughout in her own education. And he did not wanted us to take over the family business and be part of it. So he consciously avoided us basically being exposed to the family business or even the office or the shop, so that attraction of money and quick, access and shortcuts people can get by just saying, you don't have to work the hard way, you don't have to work for college, you don't need the good grades, you can just, take over the family business. That's a very attractive option to some people, and it can, kind of short circuit some of the natural controls and incentive needed to build good habits and stuff. So he understood that, and he consciously worked very hard to not expose us to the attractive part of the taking over the business. So I would say both parents get credit. One more for the inspiration and the background, one more for the acting on it. And there was a part B to your question, Paul. I think you're saying the just the motivation of why I did it, right?
Yeah, I think where you thought the source of, you're just not believing in the concept, that was kind of the...
Right. Having said that, I think I want to correct one thing you called out in the question, that I didn't wanted to do the business. That doesn't mean that I had the choice. I actually had to do both concurrently for a long time. So even though I didn't want it to, I didn't have the choice. I was forced to, and I think throughout my life, I've at least worn two hats. And I can expand on that later, I guess.
Okay.
You're insane. Just saying.
You're welcome.
Okay, fantastic. Well,
and if you, I'm happy to build on that. If instead of basically waiting for another question from you, I guess.
Sure, please.
I think because the eventual focus for us is providing this information or my context or experience to other potential parents or maybe some teenagers.
Yeah, that's eventually your...
I think the way I would say is, one, do not take life for granted. Life, we take a lot of things for granted. Take for granted that your parents will be there forever in your life, that you would have, things would never go wrong. You have all the time to sort things out in life. You have a right to go to college. These are things a lot of people just take for granted. And again, I'm not saying you can't. I'm not saying there should always be at least some form of probability associated with that. Probability, which is life is not very forgiving in that way. So whenever an opportunity comes, whenever, whatever is out there, making the most of it is the way to think about it.
Well, and maybe I can... A couple things that you've given me that I notice a lot of my friends haven't gotten a chance to have is, there's less of a cushion. You're not a parent who says, you're not allowed to have exposure to the real world. I'm not going to put you in a bubble, right? You, at your best, tried to not keep me in a complete bubble. You tried to expose me, there are problems, there are issues, there's shit that comes with life, and you need to learn to deal with that, right? In a process. And you need to learn to make mistakes. The only thing I ask of you is don't repeat those mistakes. That's one of the things that freedom I have not found in any other sets of parents. I talk to my friends and they don't have the room, whether they're, or that even that understanding with a parent, right? And it's not that you're necessarily more my friend and less my parent. It's just that you make an effort to it's a partnership. It's something you do together, right?
Yes.
You show me the value of making certain choices instead of telling me, I'm your parent, this is how things work, this is why you're going to listen to me.
So yes, but let me just step back a little bit and tie it to what I think Paul and I just started off on, which is teenagers rebel, right? So this rebellious nature is always there, right? So now I think as a parent, it's a very challenging task because you want to channelize their energy
Right.
in a positive direction.
Right.
At the same time, you don't want to basically pass on your dreams onto them and then basically have them live your dreams. They have to have their own dreams and then own incentive and own motivated and own kind of their own set of goals.
Yeah.
But they're kind of, no offense, no, I won't say lost, but they're kind of really still sorting through so many things that they do need help without basically acknowledging that they need help. Right?
No.
Right. So it's a very delicate balance I think the parent has to find, which is one of the, I think from a spectrum of parenting techniques I've observed, one is basically totally taking over and just telling them what to do.
Yeah.
That never works out right.
Yeah.
The other extreme is totally letting them figure it out on their own, which can be very risky, very, very dicey, again, low probability. I think the right opportunity is somewhere in the middle, a balance of little bit of leeway, but a little bit of structure. And I think it's a case by case on the individual where that balance lies.
Yeah.
But it has to be a combination of those.
Yeah.
That's the way I think about it. And I think what you just talked about, the bubble and the learning and the constraint, those are just one way of expression of this kind of philosophy.
So the reason I'm bringing that up is,
if you want to take a Paul, does that sound like a direction we want to take with this conversation?
Oh yeah, no, that's fantastic. I have all kinds of follow-up questions, but
because otherwise Drishti will just.
That's okay. No, this is, like I said, this is a conversation for all of us. So Drishti, go ahead.
Well, the reason that I was bringing all these things up is I wanted to lead us to a point where we can have a conversation on how you, I would say, pushed me to consider a gap year or to consider taking a year off, time off, because I needed that more than I could see, right? My visibility was I want to be safe. I want to follow the rules. I want to be part of this system. All my friends are going to college. They're going to 4-year schools, I should do the same thing. Or all of my friends are following this path. You can't do this, and you're not allowed to do this, and you can't take a year off between junior year of high school and senior year of high school. And you were why can't you? Why are you not allowed to break those rules? Those rules are meant for the average, and if your needs are not the average, feel free to find a way to get what you want.
Well, let me just, you covered a lot of things, so let's just step back a little bit. I think I never, and I still don't, and I never would basically encourage somebody to break rules. Let me just clarify. What I meant is the following. I think, and let's just clarify for the broader audience, right? Which is, rules and structure broadly is a good thing.
Yes.
But structure, by definition, is a suboptimal outcome for a society where an individual is very different and unique. So ideally, you would want to have a custom parenting, education / career plan for every individual. Yeah. That is the ideal scenario.
Yep.
But we are living in a society or a world where there are resource constraints.
Yep.
So we can't afford pure custom model for every individual.
Right.
So and then when we live together, the schools have to be built for a group, not an individual. So that dictates that certain standard laws and structure has to be built,
right,
which is built for an average population in mind, right? And I think my thought there was take the structure as a starting point, but don't take the structure as an absolute. You're allowed to build on the structure, and little customization on top of that is okay. So pushing the boundaries, allowing the structure, taking the structure as a stand, and then pushing it here and there and wherever to kind of allow a little bit customization for you. That was what I meant and still live by. Agreed. I didn't say you don't have to go to school or never go there or do whatever you want in life, right?
No one's saying break all the rules and, yes. But for me, I was living in this sort of, this is how I'm going to get to success. It's super, it's an equation. There is 1 + 1 + 1 + 1. And I lived in that, guarantee of safety. And you said, that's not...
So 2 thoughts.
Go ahead.
One thought is, as much it is about me, it is always about you as well, which is most parenting relationship is a two-way relationship, right? It is built for the student or the teenager, but it has carryover effect from the parent. So that's one. So it's a unique combination of two, which dictates what is a right or wrong, or the ideal situation. And I think to the point of this particular scenario, most teenagers, and then you in particular, was a very black and white person at that age. And you wanted really one way or the other.
Yeah.
And you are now appreciating and understanding the nuances of the grays,
Yes.
which you did not at that time.
Yes.
So that's another key factor of a teenager, Paul, right? Where they want to see life in very, very black and white.
Yeah.
I would probably extend that to a lot of adults and parents.
And again, I think it is okay. I'm just saying life doesn't afford that.
Right.
The reality doesn't afford that. So I think teenagers do face that as a broader issue, or a more prevalent issue to deal with, because you're ideal and you want to see life in a very, very simpler, nuanced, very, very obvious kind of ways, which doesn't usually offer.
You don't see things in layers. You see the surface. You see everything is like, you see a surface. And I guess,
is that a subset of teenagers, or is it everybody?
I cannot speak for everybody, but from the way that I've observed my friends and other people making decisions before I took a gap year, and then the people I hung out with throughout my gap year, you notice that they don't see nuances, or they ignore nuances, or don't want to see nuances, right? They're not interested in seeing the layers of depth of, say you're having a conflict with somebody, right? They see that conflict in just their little world, right? I'm angry, they don't understand me, this is not working out, I want to leave, right? That very simple thought process. Whereas after taking a gap year, after being exposed to a million different kinds of people and lifestyles and work, you see that, okay, they're coming from this place where they have a certain level of constraint, right? Why are we in a conflict? You start to ask that question. You ask more questions. You pay attention to someone else's perspective. And then you see the layer of there's an emotion, and then there's the actual problem, and all of these other things. And so that, I would say overall, for most teenagers, it's quick to say that they don't see layers, or they don't want to see layers. And so they see the world in a surface. They see the world from their perspective. And that definitely.
And this is where, as a parent, what I went through with you, and now I'm going through with my second kid, Shaurya, I guess. And I'm sure, Paul, you have, or you will, and maybe your audience, some of the audience might be as well, is each kid is different. Each kid, grows differently, brings different perspective, challenges are there. The stages are relatively same, but when that stage hits, which order does it hit, what kind of challenges come, they are very different.
Symptoms are different, yeah.
Fair enough. It's not a disease, so let's not. It is just a phase, right? And it's long. It's a growth phase, right? A learning curve, and we all have that, It's either a physiological or it might be a psychological condition.
It's called egotistical. We think the world revolves around us.
Well, we all do. With that said, so I think I would like to use the gap year as the example, kind of a benchmark for the conversation going forward. But Paul, do we want to talk a little bit about gap year for your audiences, or just basically?
Yeah, no, absolutely. I'm a big fan of gap years. Obviously, gap years have become a lot more popular, at least in the realm of awareness, with Malia Obama, right, famously taking a gap year this year, right? I was going to, before we jump into that, I just wanted to make one comment. Amar, I think you really, let me back up a minute. I think a lot of times parents will just get so busy and they just have so much other stuff on their minds, right? Bills, work, they're working 40-hour weeks. Both parents are working. Maybe they're single parents. Sometimes I think that a lot of parents will sort of use school as maybe not a crutch, maybe that may not be the right word, but they're just sort of trusting the system, right? And that's kind of the whole point of this podcast, is to maybe think a little bit beyond that. But I really think that you articulated it when you said that, you try and observe and appreciate the nuances of the grays, because it really it's all gray in life, and it's all different for each human being and each individual, And I think to understand that and recognize it and then approach life in that way, I think is very important. And, I love how you are imparting that, upon your kids. I think that's fantastic. Especially with the gap year. I mean, the gap year is very much a break from, conventional, traditional system, right? So, maybe that's a good transition into that gap year conversation. Dershi, did you have any friends that were taking gap years? Did they all know what gap years were? I mean, what were your kind of hesitations, and what led you to your decision to actually do it?
So I'm going to answer the first question. I was part of a group of friends that were inculcated with the, pick something stable. It's a competitive world out there. And some of them wanted to do that just because of the environment. We live in the Bay Area, and there's this is a very typical kind of peer pressure environment for most Asian parents. And because they tend to live in an area with good job, good, there's and good schools and stuff. So if you're sending your kids to good schools and living in a good area, you will end up being in a very competitive, kind of very structured, very, environment that she's describing. Mm-hmm. So it has its ups, but it also has a lot of flip side. Mm-hmm. So go ahead. But yeah, most of my friends were maybe they were born here. I was probably the only one that was actually born in India and had lived in India for at least some fraction of my life. Mm-hmm. But they had gotten this, this sort of mindset inculcated in them that you want to pick something stable, you want to pick something safe, because there's this lack of, in my opinion, a lack of confidence in, I know that I will be able to add value in a way that I want to. Right? Mm-hmm. They see that the best way to add value, especially living in this startup area, is, mm-hmm. You work as an engineer or you work in some proximity to a startup.
Right.
And a lot of my friends, I have a friend who was probably one of the most intelligent girls, in all of my classes, and she wanted to be in literature. Her passion, her love was for literature. Mm-hmm. And she decided to do a double major between engineering and literature because her parents had this, slow creeping influence of that's what's eventually going to get you a job, right, out of college. Mm-hmm. And I sort of ran with that mindset, and I just wasn't succeeding because I was I don't want to not ask why. I like asking why. If I'm learning something, I want to ask why it's important, right? And if I had started to sort of lose hope in this ability to learn something that I wanted to learn, or spend my time invested in reading. I used to read before I got to high school and started hanging out with these people and have a great passion for it, but I stopped reading because I was well, it's not going to eventually get me to those goals. I'm not doing the quote unquote right thing. And I needed some semblance of structure. My father said, when I graduated senior year, you don't seem to be happy with your choices of where you got into college, right? And I was I'm not. I know I deserve a little better. I know I deserve to go to the school that I really want to go to. And he said, so then try for it. What the hell is going to happen if you do it a year later mm-hmm. and take a year off? And I was so afraid of that unknown. And I was hunting around and I found a program called On College, and there's some semblance of structure, right? There's a coach, and it wasn't, my sort of notion of gap years was that you take a whole year to do just one thing, but it provided a little bit of variety. You got to travel, you got to have some in-depth look at the startup scene, living in San Francisco, working with a coach, being in a co-working space, and having these sort of workshops that were real life workshops, like, how do you speak up for yourself? How do you market? How do you, write a blog post? All these kinds of things. And then the third part of it is, you need to find your own internship. And so that structure was appealing to me. There was just enough structure that I felt comfortable, but a lot of room to grow. And I came back to my dad and I said, can we do this? Like, this is perfect. It started off with me leaving and, going to live in another country for 3 months. And it was exactly what I needed after this, like, intense thing that I didn't like and didn't care about, which was school and trying to apply for colleges and SATs. And my father said, absolutely. So we sat down and we found a way to make the financials work. We found a way for me to be held accountable for what I was learning and, how I was growing. And my dad was like, totally, let's do this. My mother was a little bit more hesitant. She was scared and nervous to let me go off to another country all alone for 3 months, but I was absolutely ready for that level of independence. So it was perfect. There was just enough structure, just enough hand-holding, and then they let it go. Like, they progressively throughout the year let you figure things out for yourself, and it was a great model. It totally worked. And it worked especially well for me because I'm somebody that takes a lot of initiative, because the minute that I graduated from high school and I decided, like, I'm going to do this program, technically my gap year didn't start until October, but I started working on things then. I started, like, hunting down people who worked in careers that I wanted to explore, informational interviews. I started asking on college coaches to give me time before they had committed to. But they did it anyways because I was an individual that was, like, curious and loved to ask why. Everything that I was told not to do or encouraged against in high school that I loved to do, which was ask why, be curious, and wanting to learn, was encouraged and enabled throughout, like, once I made that decision. So it was perfect. It worked out very, very well.
That sounds...
Two thoughts to add. I think one, I'd like to go back to your comment prior to this, which is the contribution and the involvement and the time from the parent for the kid. And the second is more around Drishti. But I think it's a little philosophical, but I think just my 2 cents from my experience around the so I think any and all kids are like, raw, wet clay. And, as they grow, they take shape. And the shape is given by, people around them, their parents, their school, their friends, and everybody. And I think there is an opportunity to give that shape, and that shape is that character, the value, their knowledge, or whatever you can call it. And there is a limited amount of time you can shape them. After that, and over time, the clay hardens. So that is the thought process any and all parents should understand, that yes, there are jobs, yes, there is other distractions, yes, there are other priorities for everybody. But the opportunity to impress upon and shape your kids and their values and their life and their whatever in aspirations is limited. There's a time limit to that. And if you do not engage at the right time, life will actually make sure you regret that, right? So there will be, beyond a point, I think, let me put it differently. So what do you do in life? Life allows you to kind of, if you realize it later, it allows you to do something about it and change some behavior personally, right? But when it's about your kids, if somebody else, like your kid, is getting into trouble, or they basically mess up, or they do something, it's a very, very, like a double or triple kind of multiplier effect, where it hurts you as much as a parent. and you can't do anything about it.
Because it's not your change to make.
Exactly. So that is why it's so critical to prioritize being a parent when there is an opportunity to do something about it.
And it's not about quantity. It's about.
It is not.
It's about
well, and there is no success. There is no guarantee. I'm just saying why I prioritize that. I think the way I think about it is I'd rather act on it when there is some time left than do it not, like regret later. I'm not a person who likes to regret later. Number one. Number two, I think the other thought is, life, the world is changing very, very rapidly. So I think you cannot look backward to your own life and your own timelines and your present to basically educate your kids or coach your kids. You have to look forward, and I don't think a teenager has a maturity to have the anticipation or the power of 20 years, what 20 years forward would look like.
Yeah.
And neither do us as a parent, but if we prepare them on a good core, just give them some good set of, core values, that's all you can do. And then, hope that they can, be ready for the future.
Yeah.
Right? In a very, very generic sense of way instead of very, very specific sense of way. Those are kind of two very important factors or kind of thought processes I use of what I do and why I do it as a parent.
Yeah, well, on that note, the other thing is there's this sort of concept of parenting where you tell a kid, right, that this is good or that this will help, whereas living it and the kid seeing the inherent value of that, right, living a progressive value yourself and embracing change yourself. And that's something I've seen you do, which makes it more it made it easier for me to feel comfortable doing that. Fair
enough. And Paul, this one very good example I'll bring up on an extension of what Drishti said is, I had very good success with Drishti on one thing. I think I am relatively good at budgeting and managing money and finances and stuff. Mm-hmm. And in a very, very subtle way, I was able to impart most of that to my kids, not as a lecture or a lesson or the way I think I was able to do that was at any point of time when they struggle with money or budget or something they want to buy they didn't know how to afford, that or they had a question about a friend or what they're listening on news or there's something talked about. We started talking about money, and I used that opportunity to talk a little bit more background on how to think about either a tax or a money in context of a topic or a question they have or they bring up. Mm-hmm. And certainly they realize, over 10, 15 years that they now know almost a lot about it at a very young age. And it was all because they learned some pieces of those in context. Yeah. And it all came together now, mm-hmm. right? Yeah. It wasn't conscious on my part, but it, at least the part where I only gave them knowledge or teaching in context, that was a conscious effort on my side, and it was relatively successful.
Yeah. There's things that I realized is shit, I actually know about these things, and I didn't realize that other people didn't. I assumed that it was
it's in context, yeah,
yeah.
But Paul, I think we're going all over the roadmap. So let's take a pause here. Let's just,
yeah, you can bring it back with whatever you feel like.
That's okay. This is all great conversation. Drishti, this reminds me of one story you told me about your dad that related to money, and that was something to do with when there was something that you wanted to buy, for example, and you went to your dad to talk about it. You mentioned something about him, asking you to, okay, well, pitch it to me, right? Sell me on the idea of why you need this and give me the background and give me the reasons why. Mm-hmm. Make your case for why you needed that. Did I get that right?
Yeah, well, yes. There are a lot of examples, but the one that comes to mind is like wanting to have a gym membership, right? And like so at Costco, they have it's $750, and it's a 2-year commitment, right? Like you're paying for 2 years of membership, and it saves you like X amount of money. And his thing was like, he needs you to be held accountable for, if he's going to pay for you to go to the gym, why do you need it? And secondarily, like, how are you going to get there? Like, how are you going to make the investment worthwhile, right? And so my pitch to him was like, I am going to use it 4 times a week, and at minimum 4 times a week. I am like going there because I take these classes, or I like these classes, and you can't find them anywhere else. And if something costs more than, a different similar alternative, they'll ask you, why do I need to pay more for it, right? You have to explain like, oh, well, it has this one feature that is very important that I need. And so with the gym membership, his first reaction was, okay, I'm going to pay for a month of it, and you're going to, if you go regularly, then I'm willing to invest in paying for 2 years, right? Then I'm willing to invest in paying continuously. And I did. So me, I'm a relatively disciplined person, and because I cared about it, I would go relatively regularly. And even if I wasn't able to drive for a while, I guess at that time. And so I would make sure, regardless of whatever it was, I found a way to get there, whether that's my mom driving me or I took the bus or something. And he was like, great, so you actually use it. So I don't mind paying for that gym membership for 2 years, as long as I know that you're actually going to use it. So something like that, like he makes you value the investment, right? And that was quite worthwhile. Whether that was a gym membership or something smaller or something bigger, it teaches you value indirectly. A lot of people say, like, it's important for you to work a minimum wage job, which it is. It's a similar outcome that happens, but to value what things cost, and the fact that somebody is paying for them.
Yeah.
So I think a few thoughts just to add to that. Just again, my experience. I think one is each kid is different. My experience with Drishti versus my experience with my son is a little bit different, and I'm sure every parent feels that. So that we can't, take one experience and apply across the board.
Yeah.
With that said, I want to give credit to Drishti as well. She allowed to be. She was. I think the way it worked out was. She's proud and have a identity and self-respect enough that she allowed me speaking to that self-respect, and she took her words seriously, and she wanted to be genuine and sincere about that. Not all teenagers are, so this will work when the teenager itself is sincere. If they are not, then this might or might not work. So this worked because Drishti was very sincere about it. So that's one. Number two, I think another quick tip which worked very well for me for both of my kids was I took what they asked of us as parent very seriously. So whenever some request was made to buy anything or pay for anything, I would always think about it, and the default was yes. Anything you want, I would like to enable that. But the condition was the following. I would then, if I say no, and I took my no very seriously, I would then not budge on that, which is I would rather say yes, but if I say no, I would then basically no should also mean no, and you should be able to take the no.
We'd never bothered to argue against the no because we knew there's a reason, and we could ask why. Always let us ask why.
And that thing was coached from a very young age. So I did not let both of my kids throw any tantrum, which is I would let them ask for anything, and I would try to make it. But if I can't, if I said no, I would not allow them to basically then come back to me and somehow try to basically throw tantrums or do emotional about it. And that would actually, I would say, it'll make me even less likely to listen to them in the future.
Yeah, once in a while we did, and he was like, why would I listen to you? There is no reason for me to listen to you. Like, go whatever, you can cry, you can throw. I don't give a shit. Like,
but it is basically, again, genuine, right? On my side too. I would genuinely listen and understand the need, but if I can't fulfill it,
Well, there has
I
to be a
can't.
rational reason. And again, the
Right.
most important thing for me was
Right.
I could ask you why, and that
Right.
made sense.
Right.
It always made sense. And
Right.
because I cared about the same things that you
Right.
care about, value the same things you value. When you give me a logical reason something doesn't make sense,
Right.
I'm going to back off.
Right.
Then I'll question myself on why I wanted it or asked
Right.
for it.
Yeah, this
And-
one is controversial. This is very, 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 very deep topic. Maybe another separate podcast.
And on sincerity, well,
Yeah.
a lot of teenagers need to be given that room to grow into like someone who is allowed to like that their word means something, right? Like not enough people expect
Yes.
stuff out of them.
Right.
They expect you to not take to your word. They expect you to not take to your word. They expect you to not, like be so much more than just a teenager. And what I've seen in you and other people who inspire kids to like, get to a level of maturity, like one of my teachers in high school, Maya Stewart, she does this for a lot of other kids, but she mentors kids into taking responsibility for their lives. And a lot of it comes from like just giving them a set of expectations that is higher than anybody else has for them. And it's saying like, you can make those decisions. You're capable of making those decisions.
The general philosophy there has been, I think, so the kids grow very fast, right? Teenagers are in a very, very aggressive growth path. So instead of, again, working with them on what they were or what they just were or what they are, I always work with them in the mindset of where they are heading. So I always have to stay one step ahead. So if it's a teenager, I treat them like young adult. If it's a young adult, I treat them like an adult. That way, it allows that space for them to grow up into it, right? So the expectation as well as treatment, not just expectation, the privileges too are aligned one step forward in my mind, Paul. And I think it has worked very well with Drishti, which is I give her the status and the treatment of a few years older person than she is all the time, both with the privilege side and responsibility side, and she always fills that space very quickly.
Sometimes, not always. There are times I take the privilege, run with the privilege, and forget about the responsibilities.
Well, you try. But you don't fight it when you called out on it, right?
Yes.
You don't. You run with it as much as you can under the radar, but called on it. You acknowledge that.
Sir, I would love to give you some more control over the direction of the conversation.
No, this is all great. Let me ask you about Drishti. Let me ask you about your travel. You said that you took 3 months to go travel solo. Tell me a little bit about that experience.
So, a little correction. The program, we had a cohort of 16 or 17 kids, which is pretty big for the average.
Mm-hmm.
And so I went with like 6 or 7, no, technically the total of us were 11 kids, but we didn't leave together. We were all in different parts of the U.S. We met for the first time as program attendees when we were there.
Okay.
So while I was there, we were all living in one house. But I was very different from the rest of them inherently, right? Culturally, I came from being Indian. A lot of these kids maybe had come from a semi-conservative culture, but they had grown up entirely in America. So for me, there was a cultural gap to bridge, but we were, as a group, some very liberal kids, right? Like we ideologically agreed, not necessarily, in examples or how we were, smaller things about how we were raised. So I wasn't entirely alone.
Okay.
But yeah, the sense was that I made a lot of decisions by myself. I went to Indonesia, which is the other side of the world, and I had been on a 10-day trip that was with some teachers. But at that point, the ultimate responsibility is still on those adults, right? Like at this point, I was 18. I left last October, and I booked my own tickets. I dealt with the housing stuff myself. While I was there, was managing kind of where I was spending, how I was spending myself, getting yourself around. Like, you don't have a car there. You don't have anything else there. You don't speak the language there. And in some senses, as a group of uncollege kids, we had a little bit of an identity. We helped each other out with some things, and we lived together. But I was one of those kids who took a lot of trips on my own. It helped with a level of confidence in making decisions, right? As much as I was 18 for senior year of high school, I had a car, I would leave. I still come home to sleep at a house with my parents. I'm still ultimately responsible to them to say, hey, like, if sleepovers weren't really a thing, you know, culturally, my mother didn't find it appropriate generally. But now I had a decision of what time I came home, like, you know, if I went out, if I went to a club, if I went to XYZ, the restrictions are much looser in Europe and certain parts of, like, Asia. And so I got that sort of out of my system, right? And I realized that I wasn't that interested in it. I tried it out, I dabbled, and I was like, really not what I care about that much, right? Like what most kids do when they go to college, they spend the first 2 years sort of like wasting it away. I did that in about a month, and I was over it. I was like, this is really not that interesting. I don't have anything, you know, like, what do I get out of this long term? Also, being able to travel and live sort of and shut out the world that was in the U.S. and all the stuff that's going on here, I got a chance to read. And one of my favorite things was like this. I had this big, just built up book list of things I wanted to read. And half of my, you know, one of my suitcases was just books. I took all these books. And I'd wake up at 4 a.m. before anyone in the house got up, sat outside, you know, did some yoga, and I just read for like 3 hours. It was pure indulgence. It was amazingly satisfying. And travel gave me that opportunity. Also, I got to have conversations with people who lived a very different lifestyle from Indian culture, American culture, like anything that I'd been exposed to. I had been exposed to more than a typical American teenager, but still, like, the more ideologies, lifestyles, you know, struggles you see, like, the more you have perspective. And one thing that I found very valuable that came out of a conversation that I had was I met a woman who was a mother, and she was married to someone. She was native to Bali, to Indonesia. She was married to a man from New Zealand. He cheated on her. They broke up, but they had a kid, right? And you can see in everything she talks to you about, it's all about her child. Every decision she makes was about her child. It gave me a lot of perspective on why my mother made the decisions she did for me her whole life. It helped me better understand my mother. And at some point I realized, like, I need to forgive her because she was just doing the best she could. And that was insight that I don't think most kids or most teenagers have, right? They think that when someone else is their parents are saying, okay, like, this is a decision I'm making for you, and you don't like it, you're like, they're out to ruin my life. You know, that's a typical teenage statement. I hate you, you're ruining my life.
Right.
I think so few general thoughts. One is, I think every kid is different. So I think the way you can tie that is figure out as a parent what motivates them, what triggers them, what, you know, excites them, and then be creative in finding a way to tie your whatever you're suggesting, a philosophy or, you know, recommendation to that. So that's one, which is, you know, see what works and how it works for individual, and then be able to use that as a motivation and then, you know, align that with what you're trying to say. Number one. Number two, never ever fight that. Never ever try to suppress that. Never ever, you know, because they have unlimited energy. You don't. They have. It's about their survival, not yours. So it will never work. So that's number two. Number three, I think there are two basic strategies. One is a very short-term, myopic, impatient approach of, I'm a parent, you have to do this, or, you know, I'll force you if you're grounded, or I'll do this, or I'll do that. And, you know, that they are because they're very creative, they will find a way out of that. It doesn't really work.
They or us? We.
Well, when as a parent and the teenager would not. I think the other is more of a long-term, sustainable, really, if you want to do it the right way and get those things addressed, values understood and addressed, there is no other way but to be patient. And if you can be, that's where, set it up in such a way that they slowly, again, the share I thought, which is see them in the role you want them to be. Have them start seeing that as well by allowing them those privileges.
Yeah.
And then let them grow into that. I do not know of any other successful way to and I don't want to be boastful or really very cocky about it, but I haven't seen any other way of getting them to grow up. And in the not the literal sense of the word, but in
having more guidance or having a better sort of sense of, because
guidance is more of a grade. Some people need more, some people need less. Some people need none, some people need a lot.
Well, some people never grow up. So then how does that situation work?
That's okay. Again, as long as they see that that's their personal choice, and you've tied it to them that's by their own choice they want to grow up, and they understand the consequences of that, should be fine.
Well, it's inherently an adult thing to understand consequences and be aware and have self-awareness and understand that you are choosing to be a child.
Which is exactly what I said. That if you want kids to grow up, you need to treat them like a grown-up. Assume and then let them know that so you have the privilege of a grown-up, but there also comes that you understand these things as a grown-up. If you don't understand it, we treat you like that and remind you of that.
Yeah, but there's also like I trust you until you break it. Right?
Oh yeah, trust but validate. Yes.
Yeah.
And yes. So that's the privilege thing. Yes.
It's an important system. Trust until you break it.
You want to talk about one example? That's very interesting. I don't know, Paul. You want to know a little bit more on that trust, but
you get to.
Absolutely.
It's a very simple thing, and I'll let Drishti give an example. But the idea is, again, on the same principle, give them the privilege. That's a privilege you have. And say, okay, I trust you that you will use it wisely.
Yeah.
But, again, have that hammer and saying, if you do break this, that is the consequence. Yeah. So, appreciate that, right?
Yeah.
So, and then, I'm very, very liberal in privileges, but I'm also very, very... if you do not appreciate it, then they will lose, and then you will not really. It's very, very hard to earn back.
Motivation to follow the line, to walk the line. It's you get these privileges because you continue to walk the line.
And this is in contrast to do all A, B, C, D, and then you will get the privilege. And most teenagers, and at least my young teenager, my boy, they're not that patient that they want to be able to do all that and wait, and they'd never make it.
We just naturally are not gifted with your level of patience, sir.
Quick gratification is needed.
And our mind.
So this works out, is what I'm saying.
Yeah.
So this aligns with that quick gratification need of a teenager or a young adult. But it needs to be sincere and honest again. But again, so to that point, I think you can't work with a teenager or a kid until this layer of sincerity has been established first, or a trust has been established first. So it is a layered path to growth.
Yep. On the trust thing, so you were like, hey, so I want you to be exposed to alcohol. I want you to understand that this is
your favorite topic.
My favorite dream. There's this big sort of there's just this big cultural sort of difference between or boys or whatever it is, something that most teenagers or most parents are very strict about. You were like, if you want to have a boyfriend, that's great. I want to meet him. If you guys want to hang out, that's great. Come hang out at our house, right? If you guys want to spend time together, ask him to come over, and that's totally great. But it was more of just I trust you until you break that trust. It's all those tiny things that teenagers are normally, given a chance to rebel with. And I was never given that chance. There was nothing to rebel against. He understood me.
That can be arranged.
Now. But there was never anything that I needed to fight against, right? We worked together. there was a problem, we would solve it. If there was something that I was scared of, we would address it, right? Like, on either end. And
well, either my memory doesn't serve me well or yours, but okay.
Maybe
there have been moments of rebellion. Let's just put it this way.
Okay, maybe we need to give mom some credit on this end, that she kind of forces us into a corner to work together because we disagree with her both so much. We think that we kind of don't have a chance.
Now we are talking about somebody who's not here, so that's not fair to her.
All right.
I love my mom, but yeah, let's just put it this way. She gave me a lot of chances to like I guess both of us disagree with her on a lot of things.
But I love my mom too. And your.
It gave us a chance to sort of partner. It was a very natural, easy, like, we both disagree with this, let's find something else to solve the problem. Whatever it was, right? Whether it was something that comes up with my younger brother, whether it was a problem that was in my life, like, yeah, you work together. And that's not to say that we haven't made our major mistakes on both sides. Like, there's been times where he doesn't understand and he's frustrated and whatever it is, and there's times where I don't understand, and that trust is that eventual thing that keeps you working together. There's only been a couple times where it was seriously wounded, right? But it works. It works when there's trust. It works when you also, like, I know that he wants what's best for me. And whatever he's trying to impart, like, it comes from a place of he wants what's best for me, right? And so my job in that equation is to try and understand why whatever he's trying to impose or whatever he's trying to tell me to do or ask me to do is what's in my best interest.
Yep.
And that's why it usually works so well together. Sir, do you have any other questions?
Well, I could talk to you guys for hours easily. I mean, this is such a great conversation and discussion to have. We're, beyond the 1 hour mark, and I don't want to take up too much of your time.
Oopsie.
So no. There's no time limit or anything, but I want to be respectful of your time too. But maybe I could just end with I ask the same question of everybody at the end of the podcast, and I'd like to ask it to you guys, and you guys can decide who goes first or whatnot. The question I ask is, this podcast is called Raising Rebellion, and the rebellion term refers to rebelling against simply throwing our kids through the expected system of school, job, career, and not even looking outside of that structure, and instead trying to look internally and seek out ways to live your life that's more meaningful, that's more purposeful. So the question is, what advice could you guys give to people who might be listening on how to become a successful rebel in life?
You want to go first? Should I go first?
Go first, sir.
Okay, just thanks again for the opportunity, Paul, and it was a great conversation. But on the particular question, I think I will give you a very counterintuitive answer. Most people look outside when they're talking about, but I would say go inside. I think it starts with personal responsibility. So two specific thoughts there. One, as far as raising kids goes, it's a three-legged approach. A parent, the individual who's we're talking about, and let's just call it a teacher, but that represents the whole education system out there. Out there. So it has to be a three-way partnership, period. And I think this is where, to your earlier point, if a parent is leaning too much on the system or the school or the teacher to do that job, it will fail. If we are putting most of that burden on the kid, it will fail. If the parent takes on most on him or himself or herself, it will fail.
Yeah.
It has to have a three-way balance. Even two things working might not be enough in most cases.
Right.
So all three has to work. So that's number one. Number two, I think if I as a parent want my kid to be a responsible adult, I have to first set that example myself. If I want them to take ownership of their career, I have to first set that example. Let's say I take my responsibility in that three-way model first, because that is the only thing I control. Only thing I control is what I do. And as a parent, do not control what my kid does. I, as a parent, do not control the teacher or the school, what they do, or the peer, that group does. So I, as a parent, need to first take the responsibility and do what I need to do. That sets an example for my kid to then hopefully see their sincerity, see their effort, see their energy, and meet me halfway. And I think if we both are doing our job, I think we can easily hold the teacher or the school or the environment accountable, or do something about changing it if they are not.
Right, or build it to your needs, right?
So that is totally counterintuitive to how a usual parent does. They think the teacher, then the student, and themselves. I'm actually totally reversing that paradigm and saying it should be the other way around. But that's just me. And that's the rebel in me.
I love it.
Solid. I don't know if it's counterintuitive to say that you should look inside yourself, but I think that rebellion is identifying and knowing what is unique about you and different about you and what you want. I think one of the most rebel things that you can do is grow up and say, like, first identify what it is. Obviously, take some self-reflection, but identify, like, this is what I want, and be confident and understanding that, like, this is what I want, and not let other people challenging you become sort of a self-defensive thing, but become a reason for you to better know or better, like, look at what it is you want, right? And going for it, right? You're doing that. People at WDS do that. The rebellion is actually standing up for who you are as an individual and uniquely, and knowing what you want. And rebellion to me is making decisions with complete awareness. If you are choosing to follow follow a crowd in making a decision, like, for example, if you're deciding to go to college, like, be absolutely conscious and aware of what that is going to entail, right? Financially, holistically, like how that affects you and how that affects your life for the next 10, 15, 20 years. And if that actually is going to work for you, right? Like, whatever decision it is you're making, be absolutely aware of what that entails and why you're making it. Why is a really important question, right? I think to rebel is to actually ask why, to actually know what you want, and to make every decision with a level of self-awareness and consciousness. Because it's so easy to get swept up as a young person in doing something that everyone else is doing, right? Because they're doing it, it must be right, right? But what if it's not right for you? So for me, rebellion is, yes, making a decision consciously, taking the time to figure out what you really want, and feeling comfortable exploring to get there, and knowing that when you choose something, you're doing it for your why. You have a why, and you know that why, and that why is what drives everything. So to me, that's what rebellion is.
I love the self-awareness and the advice and observations that both of you gave. Just fantastic. And not only the conversation, but, I just wanted to say thank you so much for sharing your experiences and sharing the dynamic really between the two of you guys. I thought it was fantastic. Just hearing you go back and forth. It's new for this podcast, and I love it. It's awesome. And thank you for sharing your stories. Really interesting and some very thoughtful insights from both of you. I can't thank you enough for taking the time and sharing your stories with our audience. So thank you both very much.
Appreciate the time. Willing to volunteer for if anybody has any follow-up questions on my experience, or if I can help in any way, any parent or any young adult, I'm available and willing to spend that needed time.
Wow, that's amazing. So Amar, if people wanted to reach out to you, how would they contact you?
I think an email is the best way. It's amarpal.narang@gmail.com, but I'm happy to take a call or text as well. If you don't mind, can I share my number?
Sure, absolutely.
408-250-3187.
Okay, fantastic. Well, like I said, I want to be respectful of your time, so I know I've taken up quite a bit already.
Oh, man. Fun. Don't worry. I take every chance I get to have the push-pull conversation with my dad. It's something that we value very much. It's a central part of our relationship. So it was my pleasure, and I'm pretty sure his pleasure, although I don't really shouldn't be speaking for him. So yes, thank you. And let us know if you need anything else.
Okay, absolutely. Thank you. Thank you again. And you guys. Yes, Amar.
Take care.
Okay. All right. Take care. Bye-bye. Once again, thank you very much to Amar and Dershti for taking the time to chat with me today. RaisingRebellion.com is where you can find all of our podcast episodes and show information. If you sign up for our mailing list on the site, you'll get some extra tips and thoughts for Rebel parents in our update emails. If you're enjoying the podcast, please do share with your friends and family. But most of all, I hope you find this podcast helpful, and I truly appreciate you listening. So until next time, go Rebs.